Neo Genesis is aptly named, for it was the beginning of an entirely new age for the Pokemon TCG. It produced a ridiculous amount of cards that were not only used in decks, but were the focus of decks. So many cards from Neo Genesis just straight up became archetypes. The sheer power and usability of these individual cards completely outclasses base set, jungle, and fossil combined, which is an incredible feat considering how OP those sets are considered. Neo Genesis would remain the most influential and used set until it was rotated out with the EX era. 7 sets were released after Neo Genesis, but even at the end of the Wizards era, Genesis cards were still the most powerful and the most used. Cleffa made its way into every single deck, no matter what it was. Sneasel and Slowking were so good they had to be banned, and powerful trainers like Focus Band and Double Gust became instant staples. And later into Neo On, when the e-reader cards were introduced, you had supporter cards, which were very powerful, but you could only play one per turn. But that's not to say that Neo Genesis did have some stinkers in it, and it pains me to announce that the card I deem as the worst in Neo Genesis is Heracross. It was close between Heracross and Arcade Game, but Heracross is my second favorite Pokemon, probably my favorite to use in Gen 2 as a playthrough Pokemon. So the hurt was deep when I saw that Mega Horn got one of the most hated carryovers from the gym sets, which is a powerful attack that if you flip tails, it does nothing. If they would have just left it as a 60 damage attack for 3 energy, would have been fine. Would have been a great holo card, would have gone into a lot of grass decks. You don't even need the Pokemon power. That's a really great Pokemon power, especially considering Focus Band, but to make Mega Horn only work 50% of the time, that is just a huge nail in the coffin. This thing is unusable, it won't make its way into any decks, especially when you compare it to the absolute monsters that were produced by Neo Genesis. Why would you limit this card so much? And this unfortunately does set a trend, as the TCG has never been kind to Heracross, but that's for a later video. Let's get into the 8 cards in Neo Genesis that I feel are overlooked, overshadowed, and overall underrated. Actually, before we get into the main list, I do want to mention Apom. It did not make the cut, as the more I thought about Pilfer and the more I've used it in decks, it relies too heavily on that coin flip. It is a great card for preventing deck outs, but essentially you put yourself in a loop of just playing an Apom and an energy card every single turn, and then returning it to your deck. Sometimes you do get that extra card from your discard, but mainly this is just an anti-stall tactic, where you end up stalling yourself. But if you're playing against any type of aggressive deck, then whenever you use Pilfer, whatever Pokemon becomes your next active, you're basically leaving vulnerable, and for that reason, Apom was left off the list of underrated cards. But Genesis Pikachu did make the list because it is greatly overshadowed by its own baby form, and yeah, I think Pichu is a much better card than Pikachu. But Pichu can only deal damage to Pokemon that have powers. Pikachu, on the other hand, is a great electric type attacker that you can splash into any deck and use Quick Attack for any type of energy, which did give it an advantage over base set Electabuzz. So a lot of people that wanted to tech in an electric type attacker would go with Genesis Pikachu over Electabuzz so that they wouldn't have to include any lightning energy in their deck. So this became very useful for fire type decks, which are notorious for basically forcing you to run only fire energy. You could run a Pikachu in those decks for some water type coverage and use Quick Attack off of a fire energy. In Neo On especially, Mantine became the go-to tech against fire type decks. So if you're running a fire type deck, you can include Pikachu to be the tech against the tech. And that's why they call it the meta game. Next on the list is Super Rod. Now, a lot of people use Nightly Garbage Run to get basic and evolution cards out of their discard back into their deck. That way they could reuse them later in the game after they fish them out. But Super Rod does all of that work for you. Granted, it only gets you either an evolution card or a basic Pokemon, but either way, you're still getting a Pokemon card directly deposited into your hand. So if you wanted a fast way to get Pokemon from your discard directly back into your hand, Super Rod was the way to go. It wasn't as powerful as Garbage Run, but it was faster. And once Garbage Run was rotated out, you didn't have a lot of options for getting Pokemon back out of your discard. Regardless of all of that, Super Rod still gets overlooked as a utility card and is really a forgotten card in Neo Genesis. One of the reasons why is the next card on this list, Time Capsule, which is basically a super nightly garbage run that allows both you and your opponent to pick 5 basic Pokemon, evolution, or basic energy out of your discard and shuffle them back into your deck. Now, right off the bat, this has a huge advantage over Super Rod. However, you're giving that same advantage to your opponent, and with Super Rod, you can play 4 of those in one turn and potentially get back 4 Pokemon right into your hand, where with Time Capsule, you can only play 1 per turn, and you better make sure that when you do play it, that you're giving yourself a much higher advantage than you would be giving your opponent. So you only really saw Time Capsule in decks that really burned through their own deck really fast or discarded a lot of cards to perform attacks. Even then, you would only see maybe 1 copy per deck, but it was still a fantastic utility once Nightly Garbage Run was rotated out. One of the reasons I consider it to be underrated is because it was completely overshadowed once the e-reader sets hit, and you had cards like Fisherman that could more efficiently give you an advantage without giving it to your opponent as well. The next 2 cards on the underrated list I'm going to present as a pair, because that's how I most enjoy playing them. Let's start with Ledian. 60 HP isn't great for a stage 1, but free retreat is, especially when that Pokemon can attack for 30 damage off of 2 energy and provide energy acceleration for the bench. For a card that could hit Feraligatr for 60 damage on turn 2, Ledian definitely deserved to be in more grass decks. And baton passing could help a lot of other grass counterparts, but the one I want to focus on here is Bellossom. Bellossom's Flower Dance was basically a grass version of Night Spirits. So like a Night Spirits deck, you could run Bellossom with Brock's Ninetales and do some gimmicky shit to deal a lot more damage, but the bottom line is, you don't really need to be dealing more than 60 or 90 damage with a Bellossom, especially if it's coming in after Ledian has already baton passed 1 or 2 times and dealt those chunks of damage. While these cards would serve as great counters to Feraligatr, they also had a lot of trouble with Steelix. And when it comes to building grass-type decks in this era of deck building, the community tends to put all of its focus on decks revolving around base set Venusaur or Genesis Meganium. And those are fantastic decks, but so is Bellossom. It's just it didn't get as much attention because it wasn't one of the big starters. So while I've had a lot of fun running these cards in grass type decks, and they are among my preferred grass types, the community in general just does not talk about these cards enough. I've seen a few discussions about Bellossom decks, but I have seen absolutely 0 talk about this Ledian. Hopefully this video changes that. Next up is Bill's Teleporter, and as far as I can tell, this card is very varied in usage, mostly by region. So I see in a lot of places, every deck ran 4 copies of Bill's Teleporter. In other places, nobody used it at all. On average, you're going to be drawing 2 cards, so in that regard, it's the same as Bill. But if you're willing to gamble and you can hit those coin flips, then this card is twice as good as Bill. Consistency is always king in the Pokemon TCG, but speed can be right up there as a close number 2. And if you're looking to get through your deck and get the cards you need more quickly, then Bill's Teleporter is worth the gamble. Even in formats like Base Neo or Neo On, where Bill's Teleporter and Bill were both legal. When it comes to reliably cycling cards, I think it's hard to beat the next card on this list. It's still shocking to me that Mary was not included in a lot more decks. In the coming weeks, when I start posting a lot of Neo On decks, you're going to see Mary pop up because I love using this card. Most players prefer cards like Bill because a lot of times when you play it, it's the last card in your hand, and so you just get a 2-card advantage. But in formats where you have Cleffa and Professor Elm and later Copycat, Mary is just an incredible way to draw cards and preserve cards in your hand that you don't quite need to use yet for later. Using straight up draw power like Bill, or even with Professor Oak where you're having to potentially discard cards as well, you're really just emptying your deck and filling up your hand or discard, which I feel is a bit of a waste. It's a little bit of mismanagement of resources. Instead of straight up draw, I prefer to cycle my cards with Mary. That way you're still getting more cards in your hand to use while also preventing deck outs. Using Mary over traditional draw power means that you don't have to rely as heavily on cards like Nightly Garbage Run or Time Capsule. And I'm not necessarily saying you should use Mary over a Bill or a Bill's Teleporter. They work great in tandem, so if you're going for full draw power, Mary can serve as a balancer for those cards. And now for the card that I feel is most underrated in Neo Genesis, Donphan. Yes, Donphan did have its own archetype, but it doesn't even get credit for that archetype. The archetype's name is Baby Porter, which is named after Dark Alakazam from the Rocket set. It's just people started using Donphan instead. But Donphan does not use Teleport Blast to teleport a baby Pokemon to the active position. It uses Rapid Spin, so if anything, the archetype name should have changed to Baby Spinner. One of the major reasons I put it at the top of the list of underrated cards is because this Donphan won the 2002 World Championships for the Juniors division, beating out other big decks like Dark Feraligatr, Steelix, Kingdra, and Macargo. Yet no one places this card in the same discussion as other major archetypes and other major cornerstone cards. For 3 energy, you're dealing 50 damage, and you're getting a free Double Gust off of it, which allows you to move around your Pokemon however you like, most often switching in a baby Pokemon with a Focus Band attached. That way your opponent has to flip 2 coins in an attempt to knock it out, but then your opponent has to decide which Pokemon they're going to switch in and get hit with 50 damage next turn, because all baby Pokemon have free retreat. So on your next turn, you can just free retreat back into Donphan, deal that 50 damage, and then swap right back to the bench. It's just a series of continuous hit and run until you've worn down all of your opponent's Pokemon by dealing these big chunks of 50 damage to them over and over, forcing them to the bench. Donphan is a spectacular card. It is a fantastic archetype, and it really deserves way more attention and discussion. It won a world championship, so why is it never listed as a top archetype? I don't understand. So there you have the 8 cards that I consider to be underrated from the Neo Genesis set. In Genesis, the cards were either incredible or average. So by comparison, all of these average cards seemed like nothing, as they wouldn't have been able to make as many waves in the competitive metagame. So let me know down below what cards you think were underrated, or overrated, or average rated. Whatever it is, let's get a discussion going. Stay tuned to the channel for some Neo On content coming soon. Find me on the socials at any or all of the links down in the description. Thank you as always for watching, and until next video, bye.